Also, I would prefer POIs in chat.
ठीक है. Observers are requested to not crowd the chat by sending reactions or messages, because obviously speakers may need to look out for POIs in that and also distract the speakers while they're making the speech. ठीक है. Just be mindful of that. All right then. On the motion, this House believes that capitalism has been more harmful than beneficial for the feminist movements. Let's have Proposition 1 here.
Capitalism is a concept that is fundamentally about creating divides in society on the basis of how much wealth you have, on the basis of what class you belong to. It assigns you value at birth. It assigns you value on individuals on the basis of whether or not you have money or whether or not you belong to a specific class in the first place. We think feminism is the exact opposite, where it was brought to bring equality in the world. That is the fundamental ideology. At the point in time where both ideologies are like contradicting each other, we think at that point in time, capitalism has only brought more harm than benefits in the status quo. Firstly, then, what is this debate about? And this is like important clarifications. Two things. Number one, this is about looking back at the interaction of feminism with capitalism. So we like essentially proving that the harms outweigh benefits. We think both can exist in the status quo, but like necessarily you have more harms in the first place. Prop does not have a burden then to provide you with like a counterfactual, as long as we show you that this harm was irreparable and you had major harms caused by capitalism in the first place. But then secondly, we think this debate is about economic structures of capitalism. So it's not about like, for example, democracy or like political systems in general. That is not what's going to be necessarily argued in this motion. Two arguments then in my speech. Number one, about how capitalism contradicts the core principles of feminism, and number two, about how capitalism perpetuates social economic harms on these individuals. Argument one. What does the feminist ideology look like? It looks like independent of any gender, any class that you're born into, any like race that you're born into, you were born equal. Therefore, you should also get equal treatment. We think the fundamental problem is that number one, capitalism contradicts this by assigning value on people, right? Assigning it on the basis of like their wealth. This means that one talks about equality while the other talks about discrimination, right? That is the first fundamental problem. The second problem is that capitalism allows for male dominance to exist, right? So people deciding the distribution of wealth, majority of the times are men, because they've had the privilege to like go above in that capitalist society. We think even in modern world, 95% of the CEOs are necessarily men, right? These are the individuals in the economic system who have to like the say to like decide whether or not they want to hire you, whether or not what they like wages they want to give you, which is why most of the problems exist, right? The problem then is that it contradicts the idea that the man should not be the one deciding the fate of women, because they themselves should have the autonomy to do that, because no gender is like essentially above the other, right? So essentially you treat everyone equally. But then thirdly, we think accessibility of feminism is also something that is necessarily compromised. It is meant to be an ideology that everyone can access, regardless of their background. However, we think in capitalist societies, you commodify feminism. You make it seem like a brand, right? Where you have like things like merch, for example, you have to like have these clothes, you have to come to these rallies, do specific stuff like that. We think structurally by nature, you lock out women who cannot afford that, or women who are not like part of a specific like background, for example, because these are women who are like, for example, working 9 to 5 jobs and I cannot afford to buy those merchandise and do all of that stuff. But before I move on, I'll take that away.
If capitalism were as harmful to women as you claim, then how do you explain the rise of women in global entrepreneurship, or them having their access to own property and credit that exists in capitalist societies?
Here's the thing. I think they still were able to bring change. That does not like mean that like you didn't have to face like hardships, etc. Right? Even the status quo you're feeling, you're having to face a lot of hardships. There's like wage gap, for example. That's a problem that's still not being solved. So yes, you're moving up the ladder, but it's so much insanely hard for you to do that in the status quo because of the fact that capitalism exists. But anyway, why is this argument then important? Because number one, we think the biggest harm that is being brought is one to your ideology, right? The system you operate in is being contradicted to your aims. We think like any movement relies on its core principles. And this is where I'm going to weigh this argument, right? Because of the fact that all your demands are on the basis of what you stand for, right? All the like change that you need to bring is on the core principles that you set. At the point in time you're contradicting those principles, you're not able to achieve that sort of change. But then secondly, we think men having power in these systems is necessarily bad, because the existence of that is a direct threat to like things like reinforcing patriarchy, for example. That's what it does, right? Where men are like supposed to be protectors of the dominant gender, or like are meant to rule, etc. These are ideologies that are necessarily reinforced now in the status quo because of like capitalism system. But then my second line of argument about how you perpetuate and instill like social economic inequalities that necessarily harm these. We think number one, I'm going to talk about like collective action here. We think that is necessarily being compromised because of the fact that capitalism exists. We think corporate feminism was something that was brought into the status quo. Why is this true? Two reasons. Number one, because capitalism tells like you to be more individualistic, right? So you have to be more self-sufficient. You have to earn money on your own, right? And you have to be somebody like different, like individualistic ideology. But then secondly, you view yourself as somebody who's separate, right? So for example, you have to get like rid of your extended family, for example, to make system where you allow yourself to earn for yourself and not for somebody else, right? That is like the emphasis of this like self-improvement, right? We think this then was also translated into the feminist movement because now it becomes more about, oh, how many CEOs like women do you have, right? How many like individuals are doing great instead of what women are like doing, instead of like if whether or not women are being benefited at the large or not. We think the problem then is number one, you start working within the system instead of like moving out of the system and actually being able to predict like the structural problems that exist within that like structures, right? This looks like, for example, not being able to show like the gender, like for example, in terms of like gender gap, you're showing like 3 to 4 CEO women instead of actually having like collective change and collective demands to actually bring change, right? We think then it brings that sort of divide. But then secondly, we think it creates more arbitrary divides too. So for example, capitalism characterizes like classes or races, right? We think these divides then also translate into feminist movement, where you have divides between the working class women, stay-at-home women, for example, or black women, white women, right? Why? Because capitalism then puts you into these brackets and like these boxes where like they, because of the fact that they have to decide who to allocate these resources and who do not allocate these resources, right? We think gender pay gap is, but then secondly, we also think there's a greater problem. The problem of like gender pay gap existing, right? We think capitalism relies on low paying jobs because they cannot like afford to give like jobs to everybody, right? At that point in time, we think most of the low paying jobs are given to women because of the fact that men are the one who take up most of the like top paying jobs because of the structure that exists, because of the fact that they were able to like move up with the structure because they were inherently privileged, because they were of like the privileged gender. We think then things like gender wage gap is something that is also not being solved in the status quo. Instead, you're actually seeing an increase in terms of like Pakistan, for example, or in India, for example. We think any change that you, even like the best case, even if you get any change, it becomes very tokenistic. So you might put like 3 to 4 women who are like CEOs to create a myth of like meritocracy, but not actually end up necessarily doing that and not actually ending up like, you know, benefiting this one. But even if when you have like things like political change, for example, right? We don't think like capitalism allows that change to come and like to actually take shape, right? Because of the fact that, for example, if you were to have like a fairness act, for example, where you promote quotas for women in office jobs, for example, the problem is they're still not able to access the same things, the same resources as men. So for example, they might not get overtime payment, for example, that men can easily get, right? Why is this true? It's because of the fact that capitalism also glorifies like traditionally masculine traits. So for example, not showing emotions or being like really, really brave or like stuff like that, right? But then thirdly, we think you also undermine the burden, undermine the value of women in general, because capitalism then assigns you like responsibilities so that women are meant to be like child bearers or like do all of that stuff or be mothers, for example. But while men have to be the breadwinners of the house, right? We think the problem is that there's an unequal power dynamic in relationship roles because the man is always going to think they're better because of the fact that like capitalism like attaches value for you if you're the one earning, if you're the one who has that money. That then means you're undermining the value of women, right? Because like these are women who are like taking like care of these children, for example, like stay-at-home moms. These are the ones whose like value you're essentially undermining. So because of the fact that we argue the motion, right, and we prove our burden, give this debate an opportunity.
Thank you, Proposition 1, for that fine speech. Now, to open the House from the opposition side of the House, I invite opposition's first speaker.
Also, can somebody tell my time? Because on my phone it was 8 minutes to
late. I just started 20 seconds late.
Can I get 10 seconds?
Yep.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. We are women, so if we lose to an all-men team, so shame on us, but a few refutations and breaking down their case before I move on to my positive case. So notice that they haven't really clearly characterized the aim of the feminist movement in regards to economic opportunities, and it's not clear to me what they're achieving from their model, right? But a few general ideas I need to get out of the way. Number one, their idea about how capitalism contradicts core values of feminism. A couple of responses to this. I think that while it's true that capitalism has historically operated within patriarchal structure, understand that capitalism itself is not inherently patriarchal. It is a system that adapts to like societal demands and changes based on profit and growth incentives, right? So the male dominance in early capitalist societies has like more reflective of pre-existing cultural norms, right? Not an inherent flaw of capitalism itself, right? So understand that over time, capitalism has facilitated progress by shifting to more inclusive practices on society and has demanded change, right? So on the comparative, in non-capitalist systems, the structures that support or reinforce gender hierarchies can often be more rigid and difficult to change, right? So understand that without a profit incentive to innovate or expand, there may be fewer opportunities to break traditional norms and adapt to new societal standards, right? So this results in slower progress towards gender equality to capitalist economies that respond more dynamically to shifts in public values and economic opportunities, right? But then also their idea about how capitalism relies on low-paying jobs and most of them are given to women. I think that unlike rigid economy systems, capitalism still offers pathways like upward mobility, right? Not right now. Women in low-paying jobs can move into higher paying positions, right? Through education, through skill building, and through entrepreneurship, right? So understand that capitalist systems incentivize the creation of opportunities for advancement through like training programs, right? Scholarships and like other career development initiatives, right? So understand that many women have transitioned from lower paying roles to successful careers in businesses, in technology, and leadership positions by leveraging educational and economic opportunities available in capitalist economies from the very get-go, right? But now let me recharacterize for you the like aim of what the feminist movement essentially wants in that regard, right? Number one, understand that they want the distribution and normalize a fast circulation of feminist narratives, right, for all women. Secondly, they want women to be financially equipped to challenges of patriarchal norms and gender roles. For example, it becomes easier to stand up to a toxic husband when you are financially independent to escape that situation. Number three, it wants more and more women to have their work recognized, accepted. They want more women in positions of power, like for example in politics, business, and heads of organizations, right? This looks like capitalism co-opting principles of women empowerment, and this leading to more diverse representations such as like female bosses and CEOs. Why is this so? Because capitalism recognizes that women who are individually autonomous can become immediate contributors to workforce and generate more and more wealth, right? But fourthly, for gender roles to slowly decrease, to have like innovative products and resources for women to empower them. Why is this so? Because it doesn't care about gender roles or hey, don't help women. Understand it, like what it cares about is the production of like women products, sanitation, period pain medication, etc., right? But lastly, it also requires for like niche women like issues that were previously ignored to be accommodated, right? But then a second general piece of framing of what like capitalism essentially is, and I will be proving why this is relevant to the feminist movement within my positive case. It is generally like an economic system characterized by like private ownership of the means of production, market driven economies, and profit incentives, right? But moving on to our principle, let me set up some contextualization for you first, right? Understand that capitalism is fundamentally self-sustainable, right? That is to say that the problems it creates, it also solves them. So if they say that, oh hey, capitalism created gender roles, then no, gender roles were constructed far before in like say hunter-gatherer societies, when men by virtue of being stronger went out and hunted, women stayed at home and collected berries, etc., nurtured the home because of motherhood or being so like unfacilitated at the time or due to health problems, etc., right? And so in the modern status quo, capitalism is actually the first structure to actually challenge these gender like roles, right? So capitalism says that you need as big of a workforce and as like much participation as possible, and it doesn't matter who you are, you need to contribute to the overall structure and the economy, right? This means that this means that capitalism automatically had an incentive to include all sorts of people, including women, right? What does this look like? This looks like A, women being slowly hired and starting to work in a variety of jobs because capitalism had the incentive to extract value from them, right? But B, this looks like recognition of the fact that capitalism drove so much progress that it created and innovated so many new types of jobs for women, etc., right? And that can do that can do them from ease, right? For example, capitalism and profit incentive drove the industrial revolution and current tech revolution and creation, which created so many industries and machineries that created less physical jobs too, like office work where women could easily participate even without the, oh hey, women can't do this hard part of physical labor stigma, right? This created new jobs and made it possible for women to participate, right? But see, in terms of childbearing and motherhood, understand that profit incentive and capitalistic incentives made childbirth easier by introducing domestic help machines like washing machines, dishwashers, abortion pills, tampons, etc., right? Technology to monitor mom and child health, right? Devices that let women be more free for work, jobs, etc., right? That they could not, because early motherhood was extremely challenging before capitalism redefined the work ecosystem, right? But D, in terms of facilitating participation by women, this included maternal leaves of women, right, for period pain or even period pain leaves, etc., right? So why did capitalism do all of this? Because it wanted to improve the productivity of workers, and so it recognized it can solve this problem and include more women in the workforce, right? But moving on to the practical idea, another tangent to this, which is the practical idea, which is that capitalism pushes feminist freedom within the job market. Understand that modern day capitalism also values skill as opposed to discriminating in favor of a particular biological fact or some gender identity, right? It allows for equality in competition and gives opportunities. It is not capitalism which is the cause of women for underprivileged areas, but their cultural barriers to entry that leads to more exploitation, right? Understand that capitalism's focus on individual opportunity and meritocracy has enabled societal shifts that align with feminist values, particularly when capitalism is balanced with regulatory frameworks, right? So by creating a profit-driven economy that recognizes talent and productivity, capitalism gives women a leeway to participate in economically, politically, and socially, right? However, capitalism is not inherently feminist and sometimes operates within existing patriarchal structures, right? So understand that feminists must strategically leverage the benefits of capitalism while advocating for policies that mediate its shortcomings, such as wage disparities or workplace discrimination, etc., right? What does this lead to? I think that this leads to economic independence. Understand that capitalism creates an environment where women can opt into the workforce, own businesses, and make financial decisions, so generally have an avenue to compete from the very get-go, right? For instance, the rise of women in various industries such as technology, medicine, and finance highlights the extent to which capitalism economies provide women the opportunities to achieve economic independence, right? For example, female entrepreneurs like Sarah Blakely have utilized capitalism's market-driven opportunities to build successful businesses and wealth, right? So what is the way up then? Understand that while capitalism is not inherently feminist and sometimes operates with patriarchal structures, its focus on economic independence, merit-based competition, and societal progress has been net beneficial for the feminist movement. It has also empowered women, providing them economic independence and created the resources necessary to advocate for this equality, right? So therefore, capitalism and coupled with appropriate regulatory frameworks has allowed the feminist movement to thrive far more effectively than it would have through non-capitalist systems, right? So understand, on their side, they have to prove to me that why socialism or any other alternative model they propose doesn't eradicate the core value of what feminism essentially wants, right? Because of what essentially wants, right? And for all those reasons, also proud to oppose.
Thank you, Opposition One, for that very fine speech, and a gentle reminder to all speakers who are going to follow in this round to stick to the stipulated time limit. All right. Now to continue with the case from the proposition side of the House, I invite proposition second speaker.
Just a second.
Wait a minute, Panel.
इसका वेट करो.
Muni.
Funniest judge. हाँ.
Right, we are ready. You're good to go, Daniel.
Okay. I'll be taking my POIs in the chat. Or okay, I'm good to go. Starting my speech promptly. Capitalism perceives and views people as islands. Islands in a bubble that never help women bring collective change because they are always individuals that are detached from each other. It divides people on multiple fronts and it always protects that oppressive structure, which is why we propose. I want to know two things for anything else. First of all, in this debate, we don't have a burden for a counterfactor or a counter model to prove how things will be better. Why so? Because this debate is a discussion. We're looking at capitalism and looking at feminism, and we're discussing the harms and benefits, and we're discussing which one outweighs the other. There's no need or requirement for counterfactual here. I don't get where that's coming from. But second of all, we necessarily agree that some change has been brought by capitalism. So all that examples become moot in this debate because we agree with some of them. I think the point here necessarily is that we prove two things. Number one, that capitalism has independent harms to feminism. And second of all, that capitalism harms outweigh the benefit in a significant major way. They don't do this comparative. And I want to note here that as opposition one speech stands, they don't actually prove that the benefits are more because they say that, oh, capitalism fueled the patriarchy in the past or legitimized the patriarchy in the past. Even if that is all proposition were to argue, we could still probably prove that it led to more harms because it was that same capitalist system which legitimized the patriarchy in the 60s, in the 70s, when you were not getting any change. If they want to say that it helped the system right now, they also have to argue the past because capitalism is not something that just came about right now. It's something that existed for history as well. So I think even on those notes, something that we're winning on. I'm going to talk about two things in this speech. Firstly, on feminist principles and whether they contradict with capitalism, and secondly, on change for the feminist movement. Firstly, on feminist principles, they say that capitalism shifts in terms of what society wants. I have four responses to this. Number one, let's take this premise as is and not even refute it first of all. Let's just look at what it means in the real world. In the real world, if capitalism really does what society wants it to do, then let's look at Pakistan, India, most developing countries, where the popular sentiment is that women should not have certain rights. By this logic, in these countries, the harm to women would be severe. The harm to women would be that they could not get any jobs. The harm to women would be that to consistently be trapped under a glass ceiling. The necessary point here is that it legitimizes political oppression, and this is the unique harm because capitalism exists in a different sphere than the political system. If the political system is really, really bad, then all capitalism does on their side of the house is further legitimize it and further oppress women. So I don't think this is fundamentally true. But second of all, they say capitalism shifts, and it sounds like a great idea in theory. But how does capitalism really shift, right? Because here's the problem: you gave ownership to capitalism to men from the start. How does that ownership necessarily go away? Even if the system in thought demands that change, I don't think men are ever going to let go of that control in the first place because of the fact that you've already been divided into different social classes and different genders. And because they are one collective united gender, I don't think that they want to get that form of change. We've seen this, right? You still have less than 5% of female CEOs in the first place. A lot of women still work in an underclass of, for example, weaving or, for example, factories in the first place. So I don't think this is true. Third of all, gender roles are in the interest of capitalism. Why? Because look, capitalism wants to maximize profit. So if it can capitalize on any societal narrative that fundamentally treats women as inferior, it can do that to pay them less. Because if women are inferior, then you have to pay them less for the same job than you're paying a man. So it's always in the interest of capitalism to fundamentally prey upon these very narratives. This means that, for example, you start working in fields like weaving, you start working in fields like teaching, which is significantly underpaid and not have any benefits. Fourth of all, I also think that capitalism has an incentive to give you the double shift, i.e., women have to take care of children and women also have to work work and go out into the workplace. Capitalism has an incentive to do this because in the home, it doesn't have to pay you. So it's a maximum profit because what you're doing is you're a baby machine and you're reproducing labor for capitalism. That is how capitalism sees you. Necessarily, the problem here is that we think, again, you're demeaning women, and even the work they're doing, they're being paid half for it at best because half of the work isn't even compensated by capitalism. But the principles that we talk about here are ones that are not engaged with. First of all, in terms of quality, all people, regardless of man or women, should be born equal and treated as such, which is something that is recognized within the feminist movement. The problem is that capitalism says that people have an assigned value on the basis of wealth, what kind of family you're born in, what kind of things you're able to do. But the problem here is that equality is a core tenet of the feminist movement. We think you can never achieve that core tenet in a system that is fundamentally unequal, that fundamentally distributes wealth in an unequal way. The reason why this matters is because regardless of whatever, regardless of any change, there is no point of the feminist movement because the end point of equality is one that is unachievable in the current political system, economic system. So I think that's something that they don't engage with. The second thing we say here is that because men are the ones who decide this, men always potentially patriarchy. The last thing we say here is also accessibility is something which is heavily undermined. Because women are working in the working class, you created an underclass that does not have the time, that does not have the money to go out and speak for their issues, that does not have the time to go rally and go protest. And because you lock these women in these jobs, I think the feminist movement never hears from what these underclass really even want. So even if you get change, the change only helps the top 2-3%. So I don't think that's significant. The second change, say, clash is in terms of change for the feminist movement. They say you have industries and you have jobs for women, and this is necessarily something great. I have two responses. Number one, a lot of the change they talk about is not actually through capitalism. It's actually through intervention in the capitalist system by the political system. For example, quotas, maternity leaves are not something capitalism naturally produced. It was something where the political system had to intervene. So this is actually a recognition that capitalism is bad and it would needed formal intervention to fix it. So I don't necessarily think this is a benefit that they can claim. But second of all, I think they can state lots of examples that you needed women in this workplace or this workplace. But the broad actual incentive structure here is that because capitalism wanted this underclass of women to stay because it had to pay them less, because it didn't have to give them those same benefits, it had the consistent incentive to oppress you. So I don't think that a lot of jobs and examples they talk about necessarily apply in this situation. What were the argumentation that we gave to you here? Firstly, in terms of the gender pay gap, this also takes on a lot of their arguments, right? The fact necessarily here is that capitalism creates a myth of meritocracy. For example, in the United States of America, if you there was literally a poll that was conducted where 70% of people thought that the feminist movement is not needed anymore because we have got the change that we needed. You know how capitalism does that? It creates that myth. It shows you 3 to 4 female CEOs and you're like, now the problem has been fixed. Now women are on the top. But the problem is that an underheard underclass is the one which consistently gets oppressed and is the one that faces the huge impacts of the gender pay gap, something which they do not engage with. The second thing we say is that capitalism has made feminism lose collectivism because now you have less rallies and those rallies are less radical as well. Because now it's just a you issue. It is a you issue because you are the one who's fighting the glass ceiling as an individual who's doing that job. It is now no longer a feminist issue because of the fact that you have different lives, you have different circumstances, etc. And capitalism also divides in terms of that. So I also don't think that's something that exists. Before I move on, I take a POI.
Do you think that there's a new market of women that has been generated due to this capitalism who generally do not relate to all of these masculine traits and are able to speak up on them? Do you think that that is still a harm on your side?
I don't think that that is necessarily true, and I think that's not true for a few different reasons. Number one, industries that women have women are industries that are not heard, industries that are not paid. For example, the teaching industry. But second of all, again, the analysis that a lot of the market of women that you have are just women who are being significantly harmed because these are the women who are being forced to work 12-hour shifts in weaving sweatshops in Bangladesh or Pakistan, and they have to go home and take care of the children as well. So that's the kind of double shift we're talking about. The last thing I talk about in this speech is in terms of political change. This also kind of deals with the POI in a further sense. The point necessarily here is that you have had a lot of political change for women. We agree that's a good thing, right? So for example, you had quotas or something they could have talked about. But the problem necessarily here is that capitalism fundamentally makes even change in the political system worse. The political system, by the way, is better because the political system treats people as equal. The democracy says that everyone has one vote independent of whether they are rich or poor. So that's a distinction. But what the economic system does is that the economic system, for example, only gives raises to men because men are the ones who have traditionally masculine qualities that are demanded in the workplace. Qualities like being ruthless, qualities like that are perceived in that sense. So these are the kinds of qualities that you reward in the first place. So I think raises, overtime hours are ones which are only likely to be given to men because capitalism unequally divides women and creates fundamental divides. Vote proposition.
Thank you, Proposition 2, for that fine speech. Now, in order to continue with the case from the opposition side of the House, I invite opposition second speaker.
Could I get 30 seconds?
Yep.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Zan, are you back? Are you good to go?
Okay. My PY preference is in the chat.
I just wait a second. We are waiting for one of
Oh,
our
okay.
judges to be ready.
Oh, okay.
No worries, then take your time.
We can start now.
We're good to go.
Just a second, I'm setting up a timer. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. Can a system that promotes individual freedom and economic opportunity truly be at odds with the fight for equality? Capitalism, despite its flaws, we think, provides the space for women to assert their agency, to challenge all of these traditional gender roles, and to build a future of their own choosing, which cannot exist otherwise. I think that rather than hindering feminism, capitalism simply empowers it. It offers women the tools, the opportunities, and the platforms to drive social change. For capitalism is not the enemy of feminism. It is in fact one of its strongest allies. Very, very proud to oppose. A few pieces of rebuttals then. Number one, the idea that this isn't just the benefits that capitalism is providing you, it is simply the intervention of the political system. I don't think that that's true, because I think that capitalism in and of itself is something that gave women the power and the resources to even get into the political system in the first place. This looks like things like economic independence, etc., where women were able to even go out and work, and they concede to this. They say that the value that like how you're perceived in society is generally dependent on you going out and you working, right? I think at a point in time where you see a shift in that happening, that means that women are being valued more. So for example, working women are now advocating for workers' right, because before, when they were not there, I think they didn't even know that the problems of these workforce even existed. Now they use their material and they use new power to speak against harm, and they get into these political positions, they get into worker unions, etc. I think the politics would have never reached women to the extent it has without things like capitalism creating wealthy women in the very, very first place, who give back and build up their community, right? I think at number two, women are now being able to spread their narratives because these narratives have a market appeal to other women, and hence capitalism now tries its best to facilitate the spread of these ideas via social media, via selling of women literature, via selling of women art, etc., etc. Their idea that it glorifies traditional masculine traits. I don't think that that's true, because number one, tons and tons of new modern initiatives have already turned against traditional traits because they realize that there's a market of women who simply do not relate to them. So for example, narratives like self-love and it's okay to rest if you're a man, etc., are narratives that are made to counter traditionally masculine narratives like hyper ambition, etc. But also, I think these traits now capitalism tells people that ambition is not a masculine trait in the first place. It's a feeling for everybody. Anyone can want to achieve things without being labeled hypocritically for it. Oh no, women are being too ambitious. I think these are the kind of narratives that were perpetuated by men to make submission and to make weakness feminine traits. These were labeled as masculine because of gender stereotypes. Capitalism is simply now correcting them. For example, ambition was now only seen as a masculine trait, and it was seen as threatening for women to even be ambitious. I think by that metric, whoever earns gets power, and I think simply then women can earn and simply become powered and like simply become powerful. Then I think capitalism has fundamentally given women much more benefit that they have before, and that is the exclusive benefit that these people have. The idea about gender pay gaps. Number one, I think that capitalism at its core is not the cause of these gender pay gaps. It's a reflection of societal norms and cultural biases. The pay gap persists due to entrenched gender stereotypes, unconscious biases, and even historical inequalities, not because of capitalism in and of itself. While capitalism rewards skill and market value, this gap only results from unequal access to opportunities, not from the structure of the system. Debate the motion, please. In fact, capitalism simply provides the tools to address these disparities, such as transparency, such as competition, and even legal mechanisms for reforms. But also, secondly, I think the pay gap has generally become much less and much more equal because of capitalism. Because women are using the material that they get from capitalism to create narratives and fund activism that lowers the pay gap. Then they use capitalism to beat these problems of workforce and capitalism, right? So, for example, in Pakistan, you use capitalism to shift the narrative around women, which is why there is more branding, etc., that already exists for women in the very first place in corporate structures, etc. I don't think that you can come up here and gaslight everybody. But also, secondly, on the idea about how this creates double shifts, etc., I think that while like it does create a kind of narrative, they're still forced to balance like paid work and disproportionate like unpaid domestic labor. They misunderstand the root cause of this issue, because I think that the double shift is simply not an inevitable byproduct of capitalism, right? It's a reflection of deeply ingrained patriarchal norms. But also, secondly, I think the increasing participation of women in the workforce and the rise of gender equality movements within these capitalist societies have simply put pressure on businesses and governments to create policies that address work-life balance, etc. If anything, capitalism in and of itself provides the resources and the structures to challenge and change the structural norms. Then on the idea that you won't help like the marginalized communities or these other disenfranchised communities, because within capitalism only the people that get to the top are the ones that are able to access all of these benefits. I simply do not think that that is true, because feminism in and of itself is not monolithic, and class disparities, number one, within feminism exist regardless of that economic system, right? Capitalism simply offers you access to things like education, things like entrepreneurial opportunities and financial independence, because it enables women from diverse backgrounds to even engage with feminist like formats, etc., in the first place. But also, secondly, I think that at a point in time where you start talking about like women just generally getting better opportunities, sure, we concede to that. I think, but you're still able to like donate to other women's, etc., because that is the way that capitalism works, because that is the way that private institutions, etc., allow for donations and all of these other private entities and structures to exist, which help all of these other women within feminist movements. Moving on to my own positive case. Number one, firstly, the idea that they had no like refutation to our principle within the very first place, the idea that capitalism generally gives more autonomy for these women to even come out. I think at a point in time where there is some kind of representation that is allowing for these changes to be like, that is allowing for these changes to even materialize, I think that all of those harms are then simply outweighed, because that representation can simply be molded, because that is the way that capitalism adapts. But also, secondly, I think capitalism has led to greater gender representation in the workforce and politics, so there's generally greater social progress on our side. Once you get the opportunity to get material benefit, the structure of society is that you start getting more and more social benefit, right? And privilege as well for women. I think that women who participate now get the opportunity to get these social benefits and drive this into different particular movements. Simple argument here. I think that capitalism has played a pivotal role in increasing women's participation in the workforce. This has in turn just led to greater gender representation in politics, leadership, and decision-making roles. The economic necessity of tapping into the full potential of the population has pushed industries to recognize that value of diverse talent, including women, in the first place. As women like have entered and excelled in the workforce, I think that many have risen to positions of power within corporations and governments and even international organizations. This has provided feminist movements with platforms to advocate for policy changes and even gender equality in more influential spaces. Even if the pay gap is an issue, I think you can still advocate for it, because you get that kind of opportunity that you wouldn't have in case that feminism didn't exist. I think that a simple example of this is how women in the boardrooms of major corporations or as heads of the state, etc., are examples of capitalism enabling the rise of women in influential roles. But also, secondly, I think that this allows for feminist advocacy and resource mobilization. But before that, I'll take a POI.
Your logic is that capitalism shifts to what society wants. In the United States of America, Republicans are currently the popular opinion. By this logic, would women lose jobs in the United States of America?
I don't think that that is true, because I think that the feminist movement in and of itself is something that is super, super popular. But I think that capitalism in and of itself gives the opportunity for these women to be even considered as powerful, or be to considered as influential, because that is what capitalism allows them to be considered as. And you concede to this in your characterization, because someone who earns more is always someone who's going to be considered more and more powerful. I think at that point in time, if within like the US, etc., even if the Republicans is a super, super like great party, I think that's over then. If women are able to advocate for their rights, they're able to shift all of those harms into benefits for them. Number two, idea that it allows for feminist advocacy and it allows for resource mobilization. In a capitalist framework, feminist organizations can access funding outside of state control. This is crucial in both democratic and authoritarian societies, because these resources come from individual donations, they come from foundations, and they come from like corporate philanthropy, right? I think this provides feminist movements with financial independence and resilience. But I think that also the rise of like generally corporate social responsibility has created these new avenues for companies to support gender equality as a part of their brand ethos. Example, Planned Parenthood in the US. I think this relied heavily on these private donations, allowing it to operate even when political climates like threatened like funding for reproductive rights, etc. Companies like Apple and Patagonia have publicly supported Planned Parenthood and women's health initiatives. Initially, you have things like the Global Fund for Women, etc., that have been set up that receive millions in private and even corporate donations to fund these grassroots movements in the first place. The point at which we simply achieve better benefits on our side, opposition.
Thank you, opposition two, for that fine speech. And to deliver the whip speech from the proposition side of the House, I invite proposition's third speaker.
Hello guys, can I go and use the washroom real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
What timer?
Timer. But they're from just give me a sec, guys. Are we good to go?
Yes, we have been for a while now.
Uh, opposition, in order to win this debate, has to tell you that just not by the virtue of the fact that women earn is going to lead into significant change. They have to tell you how are they going to earn as much as men in order to achieve change. But the power dynamic still stays. So even if they are able to prove to you that their women are earning in status quo, they can't prove to you they're earning as much as men in order to shift the dynamic within society, etc. Right? What this like, right, what is then this debate about? I think independent of where like patriarchy stems out or not, this debate is, has capitalism perpetuated narratives that of patriarchy within society? Yes or no? Right? Or I have like two clashes in this debate. Firstly, where the essence of the movement is harmed or not in instance of capitalism, and secondly, has capitalism has been an enabler or an obstacle in achieving feminist goals, etc. Right? They say on principle, they say that feminist movements are aimed at focused on economic empowerment, and consequently, capitalism is the only mechanism to achieve it. Firstly, I don't think that's the only thing feminist movements are targeted upon. I think feminist movements also think about legal and social aspects of like of societies, etc. Economic empowerment isn't the only focus of any movement, etc. Right? But even if we talk about economic empowerment, what is economic empowerment in the very first place? It is not for you to earn anything. I think economic empowerment implies in context of feminist movement is equality of resources and equality to actually fight back in the very first place, right? But what is capitalism like co-opting feminism? Something that they talk about in the very first place is the idea of like girl boss and attainment, right? So basically, what capitalism tells you is to be a successful woman, you have to be you have to make a lot of you have to make money and attain certain types of good in order to be a successful woman. I don't think that's something that that's something like capitalism talks about in a journal, that you need to attain a lot of wealth and like attain a lot of goods in order to be successful. I think that's not something that like feminism talks about. I think feminism talks more about having more agency of individuals and having more control over your decisions. Insofar that capitalism controls your decisions, you have to take care of that. But thirdly, something that they don't engage with, the idea of masculine, like traditionally masculine traits, i.e., in order for you to like succeed in capitalist structures, you have to have like traditionally masculine traits. I.e., you can't be a feminist and you can't be a little girl to succeed. These kind of narratives exist with that for you to like succeed in like capitalist structures, i.e., you have to fight back and man up, quote unquote, right? What did we tell you that the movement's principle is? We tell you that the movement has to like unanimously agree that the system is wrecked, i.e., the issue isn't that you want to climb up the social ladder or not. The issue is the system doesn't allow you. You have to critique the system for you to. Insofar you have to act a part of the system, you actually contradict the principle of the movement, consequent of principally bad off, right? Principally bad off. But on the practical side, like where does this debate happen, and like is like capitalism actually achieving feminist goals or not, right? I want to characterize something very important for you, like how like capitalism instills much more patriarchy, right? Capitalism through like media and education, etc., like sets out this narrative of the idea of like pink collar jobs, that if you're a girl, you're fit for being a nurse, you're fit for going into education as a teacher. These are feminist traditional jobs, etc. And these are made for women especially, right? Then the issue with like these pink collar jobs is that under capitalism, the market forces don't allow them to be paid to their extent. So healthcare sectors, etc., overwork these people a lot in order to make maximize profit, because that is the main incentive of capitalist structure, to maximize profit. Consequently, they overwork these pink collar jobs and undervalue their jobs, right? What does that lead to? That leads to women not earning the amount of money they earn, right? But secondly, capitalist structures also expects women at the same time to make sure to go home and breed babies for like future generations, to work as workers for these capitalist structures, etc. So work under paid not underpaid but like unpaid jobs for capitalist structures to make to work at home and compensate for the guy or like the man who works in the corporates, etc., for him to recover, right? But secondly, something very important, that capitalist structures are hierarchical in situations. On the top of the hierarchy, they haven't disproved this, by the way, at this point. At the top of the hierarchy, you have a hierarchy, you have a man who wants his position, who wants to assert his dominance because he likes the power. It comes with a lot of economic benefits, right? Given that is true, he's not going to let another woman who challenges his power. There's no accountability within like these capitalist structures in the very first place, especially in terms of like trigger warnings, workplace harassment, etc. There's no accountability that exists for these people because there's not going to be any sort of incentive for these hierarchical positions, right? But on to the second point, what did they have today? They say that changes in capitalist structures are market driven and they challenge traditional narratives. I don't know, like basic assumption, by the way, in this like premise is that people have control over their demands. I don't think that's true. I think capitalist structures form these narratives for a moment, i.e. what do they actually want? Something that might actually go against the feminist movement. Why is that true? Because capitalist structures don't want any sort of like protest or something against the status quo because they like their power, etc. So they don't want worker unions in their side of the world because worker unions are economically not beneficial for them, or any sort of protest is not beneficial for them. Consequently, they don't want any sort of like moral march happening, etc. Right? Right? They say that you challenge traditional narratives. I don't think that's true. You actually at the top of the hierarchy, where actually all the decisions are made in the private lobbies, the narratives are still same. But even if some sort of like there is some sort of change. These are one tokenistic in nature. So you're going to change the logo. You're going to have a pink logo, etc. Right. But secondly, I think these are out of reach of individuals who of like common man who to actually bring about change within society as a sector. Right. On to the second idea of what did they have to say. They said change and progress is only possible in capitalism and it provides competition and fair grounds for individuals. I don't think they provide fair grounds in the very first place, okay? Because I think these are advantageous positions to men because these capitalist structures enable men to have much more jobs in the very first place because they have much more resources or through education, etc. I.e., right? But secondly, I think like if the idea is that there are individual freedoms and women who succeed in capitalist structures are individuals who succeeded, they're not going to bring about change for other women because they realize that this is something they achieved on their own. This is not something that the feminist movement achieved for themselves. This is something that they achieved as an individual. Consequently, they're going to be like resentful or even far much worse off for the other women who are suffering because they say, oh, if I have achieved, I'm much more similar to you, even though she was not. But even though if I was able to succeed, so can you. And this is something morally criminal, and that's something not practically possible, right? But they say, oh, political change can't happen because of like, yeah, they say like change is only possible in economics when you have economics. I don't think that's true. Suffrage movement was carried out by housewives who were like socially aware that they need to vote, that they need to be they became like politically aware. So political change is independent of any sort of economic benefits or awareness, etc. Social movements act on challenging system, not partaking in it and legitimizing the system. For all those reasons, give this debate to Trinity.
Thank you, Proposition B. And now for the fifth speech from the opposition side, I invite opposition's third speaker.
Just 15 seconds. Am I good to start?
Yep.
Also, could someone please send just timestamps in the chat at 1, 7, and 8 so I have that idea, or should I go get my timer?
We'll check.
Can an observer volunteer to that?
I can do it.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. The biggest issue that I have with side proposition is that they are not even engaging with all the non-tokenistic benefits that are brought on our side of the case, like donations, like jobs, like CEOs, like diversity, and like the spread of women's powerful narratives that we brought to you, right? The unnecessary burden that they are pushing on us is to prove to you that capitalism alone is going to solve all of feminism problems. It is going to get you equal pay. It is going to get you everything else. But understand that the burden this motion placed on us was to prove to you that capitalism in its nature for the feminist movement had more benefits than harm within the very, very first place. At the point in time where we are able to do that, we simply take this debate, right? But understand that even if it is our burden to prove to you how capitalism is going to lead to feminists getting equal place and women getting equal and women pushing through that to that equal pay inequality, if blacks can push and eventually change the system, we have given you enough material to show you capitalism already changes to accommodate women within the very, very first place, right? The examples that we provided to you was of maternal leave, publishing feminist literature, women hygiene products, domestic care appliances to free up women's time. All of this, so it has been, all of this has existed under capitalism, and it will continue changing more and more within the very, very first place. Understand that while everything starts out at imperfect, women are allowed to now work freely, and pay has been consistently rising over the past 50 years. At the point in time where such benefits are provided under capitalism, you cannot simply say that it has not provided you any benefits within the very first place, right? But what is side proposition's response to this? The second speaker verbatim says that political intervention is what gave you those rights, like maternal leave, and not capitalism. Understand that this idea is simply untrue, right? Who told the politicians that they had to interfere and give the woman those rights? The woman, and who put the woman in the power to actually portray their ideologies within the very, very first place. This was when capitalism provided them with opportunities, and they exploited those opportunities to get into that position of influence where they could actually propagate their ideologies, and they could tell that they needed rights within the very, very first place, right? Understand that even this example shows that capitalism changes to accommodate women because it wants them to work. This is not a binary of politics and capitalism. That is a weak rebuttal on their side. Politics and capitalism is interconnected in the way that women working in capitalism identify bad male behaviors and use their new power and representation to push politics to make their life better within the very, very first place. The second idea, they say, oh my God, pay gaps exist because capitalism glorifies women's products. Masculine traits within the very, very first place. Understand that this is simply not true, right? But even if it is, I'll draw a comparative here, right? Understand that in the counterfactual, on their side of the case, men simply dominate alone and are alone without ever including women in the free market, or men dominate based on power and physical strength, etc. Right? While on our side of the case, tons and tons of new modern initiatives have turned against traditional traits because they realize that there is a market of women who do not relate to them, right? For example, narratives like self-love and it's okay to rest are narratives made to counter traditionally masculine narratives like hyper-ambition, etc., that were considered characterized to men only within the very, very first place. But thirdly, on the idea that capitalism commodifies feminism, understand that while some elements of feminism have been commercialized in capitalist society, commodification is not inherently, and commodification is not what is inherently done within the very, very first place, right? It is not necessarily undermine feminist goals. Understand that capitalism in its nature creates visibility for the feminist movement within the very, very first place, and widens its reach by allowing ideas, causes, and products to be marketed to larger audiences within the very, very first place. But still, we'll take them at their best, right? We'll pretend that feminism in its nature has become highly commodified, and all the benefits that we provided to you simply do not exist. Even then, why do we take this clash? Because understand that at the very, very least, you are still getting that sort of representation for the feminist movement that is also essential, because that is providing you with the visibility that is going to further lead to opportunities within the very, very first place, right? But secondly, on the idea that capitalism reinforces and created patriarchy within the very, very first place, this is just completely false. This is just a completely false assertion that they make. Right? Capitalism was not the reason that these gender roles were created. They were created because of religion, ideology, and the structure of early society that existed at that time. Right? At the point in time where society told you that women have a less stake in everything, at the point in time where religion told you that women were not good enough to get parts in property, etc. That is the point in time where it translated into men saying, oh, they don't need to work since religion said we are the providers, etc. These were the religious and ideological narratives that propagated to these anti-feminist these anti-feminist ideas within the very, very first place, and established them within society. Right? Understand what capitalism does. Then capitalism breaks these notions and says women should work if they want to, because they are valuable to the economy and society. Right? Capitalism does not inherently reinforce patriarchy. It is often society's cultural and normal historical norms that do so, rather than the capitalist system itself. Right? At the point in time where capitalism is the sole thing providing you with those opportunities and those benefits, on our side of the case, is we believe that it has brought you more benefits than harms. Very, very proud to oppose. And I'll provide you an example of this there then, right? In capitalist societies, individuals are valued for their skills, not just their gender, and women have increasingly entered fields like finance, engineering, and technology. This is something borrowed from their own characterization, right? Which they told you that the whole point of capitalism is that it values profit. Understand that where once men were the dominant group, at the point in time where women stepped into different fields and started flourishing in them, and and capitalism incentivized their skills and talent, not their gender, within the very, very first place. That is the point in time where women could now control their own finances, own businesses, and achieve success based on their own merit and effort, independent of the traditional patriarchal structures and expectations that existed within society. Right? At the point in time where they had this sort of platform to better their conditions and economic conditions within the very, very first place, which gave them the power and influence to propagate their ideas, and then to help women that were beneath them in status, etc., and to donate to them and become CEOs within the very, very first place. We believe that this is not an exclusive harm that you provide on your that this aim to bring on your side of the case. Right? The last issue there then on how you start working with the system rather than opposing it. Understand that by engaging with capitalism, women do not start working within the patriarchal system. Right? This is a misunderstanding of how capitalism works. Working within the system does not equate to submitting to it. In fact, capitalism allows people to challenge and change the system from within, whether through entrepreneurship, activism, or policy making within the very, very first place. Understand that you can, just because you are working in a capitalist society within its nature, does not mean that you cannot criticize the gender roles that exist within your society that were there because of cultural norms and societal norms that exist. Right? And I'll provide you an example of this. The Me Too movement is an example of women using their platform to hold powerful figures accountable in a capitalist context. The movement achieved real world change by mobilizing these capitalist tools that were provided to them, such as media, at the point in time.
We cannot hear you anymore, speaker. I assume your speech has ended. Thank you, opposition whip, for that fine speech. And now to deliver the concluding remarks from the opposition side of the House, I invite opposition's reply speaker.
15 seconds. Okay, am I good to start?
Yep.
Okay. Starting. In 3, 2, and 1. As long as we are able to prove to you that our case is simply more in the interest of the feminist movement, and the point at which they haven't told you how they're catering to any of the needs of the feminist movement, or how all of these harms that they're painting out outweigh that minimal or even like the slightest tad bit of representation that we are getting on our side, I don't think that they win this debate. I don't think they can speak the final. But a few things then. Number one, on the essence of the feminist movement and simply how we win on this. I think that firstly, capitalism was generally not the reason why these gender roles were even created. So their characterization from the very get-go is completely false. They were created because of religion, because of ideology, because of the structure of early society. Because religion told you that women would have less stake in everything, in property, etc. This translated into men saying that, oh, you don't need to work, since religion says that we are the providers, and we are generally like these were the generally religious and ideological narratives that were then put out. What do we tell you then? We tell you that capitalism breaks these notions and says that women should work if they want to. They are valuable to the economy and society. They don't tackle what the actual definition of capitalism is, which is empowering everybody to contribute to the economy because they can do it as private entities, because they can set up donations, because they can set up all of those things. But also, secondly, this entire idea about, oh, maternity leaves and how that doesn't really even like fall into this debate. I think that because of these maternal leaves, this like just because this happened, they showed that capitalism changes to accommodate women because it wants them to work. This isn't a binary of politics, and I think that that's simply a weak rebuttal that they then gave to us, because politics and capitalism is super interconnected. Women working in capitalism identifies just generally bad male behaviors, and they use their new power and representation to push that politics to make their lives better. But also then this another extension that they failed to deal with, the idea about generally rainbow capitalism, or how it's done in things like arts, how it's done in things that are sold as feminist, that are distribution networks of feminist literature, all that do to spur and activate consumership of these products in the first place. Because of this consumership, it managed to both involve women in the fold of creation and in the fold of purchase, and these products and narratives and art all rapidly increased feminist awareness, which would not have done in case that this capitalism didn't exist. I think at that point in time, if you're simply allowing discourse to happen, if you're simply allowing awareness, and if you're simply giving the mobilization and the access to resources for feminist advocacy, I think opposition wins this. But secondly, where are women then better off? I think that this is like a really funny idea that they then bring, that, oh, women won't care because they only care about what they achieve by themselves. Few responses. Number one, the community generally cares about each other. They want to uplift each other. The reason why feminist movements even exist within authoritarian regimes as well is because women generally care about each other. They can see other women struggling and they can help advocate for them, because they know if that the conditions for women to improve, they will improve for them overall as well. If that isn't true, then I think that capitalism comes into play here, because it gives you power and it gives you generally women the access to generate more jobs and to get into positions of power. This is the reason why in a bunch of capitalist societies, women already exist as C-suite executives. You have things like donations, private funds, etc., and this generally gives you a narrative of representation. You're able to mobilize more, and you're able to have more women and create movements. But even in our very worst case, and even if everything I've said is false, if they talk about tokenistic change here, I concede to that. I say tokenistic change is really good, and I think it's extremely helpful still on like for the feminist movement on our side, because it creates awareness. Because a breast cancer mug or a shirt may be created, it may be tokenistic, but I think that it still sparks micro conversations, which helps recognize generally like what women issues are and what generally society perceives them to be. Because capitalism drives progress and it lets women push for more and more rights, because organic change exists on our side. Because look at all of the other movements, even if it was really difficult for them to adapt into society, they were able to shift more and more for all of those reasons, because we protect women, because we tell you that change is systemic and gradual opposition.
Thank you, opposition reply. And then for the last speech of the round, in order to deliver concluding remarks from the proposition side of the House, opposition's reply speaker.
Okay. By this reply, opposition case seems quite diverse. They pointed out around 83,000 examples, but unfortunately, the reality is it boils down to only two main benefits. The first benefit is a rise in individual and economic autonomy. The second is collective change through unions and such. If I can disprove both these benefits and prove to you how the harms significantly outweigh them, I think it's going to be a very easy proposition victory. Firstly, on individual autonomy, we give to you four structural responses which break this down. Number one, we say the feminist movement isn't actually popular around the world right now. In countries like Pakistan, even in Europe or countries in the United States of America, the primary narrative is one that is regressive or one that is right-wing. Presumably then, if capitalism just legitimizes what society wants, then it legitimizes and extends the oppression of women in these places, where now it's in a new sphere, the economic sphere. Look, we never said that they cause patriarchy in the first place. We say, yes, capitalism and patriarchy are not something that existed because of one another. Religion was the one which caused patriarchy, maybe sure. But what we say here necessarily is because of the fact that capitalism fuels patriarchy, that is the necessary problem that they do not engage with. Secondly, we say men are the ones who own the capitalist structure. Whatever analysis you want to do, men are never going to give up their control. How so? Because of the fact that they don't want to lose jobs, you're never going to be able to reach the top. This means that either you only get tokenistic change or you create narratives like women can be ambitious too, or these narratives are representative, but these narratives have no actual value when it comes to jobs. That's something they didn't prove to us. They say you have micro conversations in reply, but I really don't know the benefit of these micro conversations, so I'm not going to engage with it. Third of all, we think capitalism also has an incentive to reinforce gender roles and make them even more important. Why? Because they want to justify underpaying women because they actively get more benefit if women are paid less. So capitalism has an incentive to use gender and use this in a badness way in the first place. So they may say you can work if you want to, but you can work in this sweatshop or that sweatshop. So that's the problem. Lastly, we think for autonomy, you need to work and then use that money in a productive manner. But the problem is because of the double shift, women never actually get to use that money because they're home or working a different shift, and in the job working a different shift, they're significantly underpaid. Secondly, on worker unions, we say a lot of things. Number one, if you don't have economic autonomy, the previous benefit falls down. This also falls down because you're unable to access change without money. Second of all, we say movements like the suffragette movement got political change without any economic intervention in the first place. What does this mean? This means that you can get change without it as well. You can get change like getting the right to vote without an economic system existing. In fact, we say that the economic system restricts your ability to protest because the underclass can't go out because they're working a job all the day. Second of all, women who succeed don't end up helping you because they don't think that you were in any part responsible for their change. Because the movement becomes so individualistic, women actually never help the broader feminist movement. So the feminist movement does not know, maybe 3 or 4 skilled women succeed, but that's not a benefit to the feminist movement necessarily. Broadly, what do you have at the end of this? Maybe you have some economic autonomy, but only because the examples they gave you. But this is significantly, you're still weaker than men significantly, and you legitimize the patriarchy, and all of that impression historically and globally around the world is something which exists and something which increases. The historical harm of capitalism is something they don't talk about. Their last ditch effort necessarily here is to say that, oh, the debate exists on a comparative, but no, it doesn't. This debate is not about what is better on a comparative, it's about whether this has brought more harms and benefits, which we've proven. Lastly, what are the harms you point out which significantly outweigh all of this? 3 things. First of all, a lack of collectivism, so individuals don't get structural change. Feminism is stifled at this point because a lot of people don't come to rallies because the feminist movement is commodified. You can't afford feminist merchandise. This means that you're fundamentally a less communal movement. Second of all, the system is fundamentally unequal. Because distribution is done by men, equality is not possible. Why is this relevant? This is relevant because even if you get some change, the end point is something that is impossible to achieve. So there is no point of the system in the long term because it can never benefit you more than it can harm you. Thirdly, we see the gender pay gap exists, which is also something that is increasing more and more. Even actual political change is stifled by capitalism because you may get the quota, but the woman is still paid less. The woman still does not get raises. The woman still does not get any amount of respect. At best, then, what you have is some marginal economic impact from side of proper opposition, but you have a real tangible harm of the movement stifling, of women not getting proper jobs. And for that reason, vote proposition.
Thank you, Proposition Reply. Thank you to all the speakers in this round for a wonderful, insightful round of debate. You'll get enough to disdain in the main hall. This means that all speakers and observers are now requested to leave this room so the panel can begin their conferral process.